always got to go to nooks and crannies or slightly further out of the centre to find places like that. And you know,
Yeah.
you have something like Vortex or 606 or something like that slap bang in the middle of the Strand or something, but it's, you know, it's not an easy thing to see happen with any of the spaces that are there at the moment. So
definitely. And I think also, I don't know, whenever I see plans with new venues, sometimes they're not very flexible, which seems absolutely bonkers given how many people are writing stuff for visuals, stuff with electronics, theatrical stuff, stuff with dance, and then people are building just another beautiful concert hall that has a gorgeous acoustic. And of course, you need that kind of stuff. But I think you need to have, you know, there's so many people writing and presenting stuff in interesting ways that it feels a little short-sighted to me to not be trying to make places that really flexible.
And on that point, we've just gone live, so it falls to me. We've just been having a very interesting discussion about acoustic and new spaces in London. I'm sure more will be revealed when we get going, but welcome to all of us who are watching on Facebook and YouTube. Sorry for us going a bit late. Technology is a bane, but unfortunately essential in these times. This is the first in our series of Insights, RNCM Q&A, and we're really, really lucky to have the wonderful Anna Meredith with us, who's composer, songwriter, producer, everything talented and creative and super. So we're going to hopefully ask a series of questions surrounding everything that she does. But welcome, Anna. Thank you for doing this.
No problem. Nice to see everyone.
It's you know, great to have you. You're in London, as we were saying at the moment. So where are you again? I'm sure everyone would love to know that.
I'm in my studio. I'm really lucky to have a place I can go and write. It's a single room in the bowels of Somerset House, right on the river. And I have a giant room I have a tiny room, but with a giant window that's just here, and it looks literally into a wall. A huge window, but that with absolutely nothing on it. So this is where I've been in the studio for about 4 or 5 years now. And it's where I've written everything that I've done in that time. And they've closed it for a bit, but they opened it up a month or 2 ago. So it's great to be able to not go insane in your house anymore and have somewhere else to go.
And having a dedicated space away from, you know, where you actually live is always really good creatively, I think. But to obviously be under the bowels of London in such a central space is quite exciting. I think there's a certain energy to that. But where if you could have anywhere as your studio, where would you have other than that, do you think?
I don't know, I found that even when I've done various residencies in the past in so-called inspirational places, you know, I've done lots of stuff at Snape, and I've done stuff in Visby in Sweden, and things in ACA Institute near Brighton. And even when I've been in very beautiful places, I'm not someone who, partly to my shame, that kind of wanders out and is like, behold, the sunset, or these trees are so inspiring. You know, I just, so to be honest, this is as good as anywhere for me. You know, it's hot, got a kettle, you know, so sure, it would be nice to have a little bit of natural light. And, but yeah, I'd maybe let you guys find that I get most of my more ideas done as I walk here than I actually do sitting down. Like, to be totally honest, I'm probably doing like 90% admin and 10% composing. Even that's pretty generous, or procrastinating, let's face it. And I get better ideas when I go out for walks, either here or out for lunch, whatever. So it's great to have a place to go, but normally I like to have a bit of meandering about purpose when I've actually got something I'm trying to work out what to do with the music.
I think there's a lot to be said, isn't there, for actually having just motion and being able to be on the go and allowing that time for coming up with ideas. I know there's the great story about Gershwin coming up with the idea for Summertime when the rest of it when he was just on a walk, and those ideas coming to him in a very unexpected moment, in a moment where he's just on the go, not trying to focus on the beauty of something or the aesthetic of that.
Yeah, I find either quite often that if I'm trying to work out a different rhythmic feel to something, if I'm trying to find, maybe I've got an idea and I'm trying to figure out if there's a different rhythmical way to view that idea, and quite often just literally using my footsteps as something to play off against the pulse of something is a way that I quite often figure out little cross rhythm feels, that sort of thing. Or I notice, even without trying, that I'm walking differently to how I'm imagining or humming something in my head. But yeah, quite often I do a kind of brutal thing where I just don't let myself go home until I've like cracked an idea. So I'm walking around like desperate and tearful in the night. you know, trying to figure out what to do. But yeah, I do a lot of singing into my phone, little voice memos, that sort of stuff. It's all very embarrassing. There's lots of squawking around the place.
Oh, I think all of us composers can emphasise with the squawking. Really, really empathise with that. That's standard practice, really, isn't it? But I think something certainly that can lead on us nicely onto another question that I was going to ask you is the fact, obviously, you're talking about footsteps and you know, just naturalistic practices that have helped inform some of your ideas and stuff. And of course, they cut across a lot of different genres and disciplines, and you bring obviously visual play into your music, and obviously you went into foray with your EP Jet Black, and then obviously your 2 albums since then, which is great. I was saying earlier on we should really probably have like the brass fanfare from Nautilus to have welcomed you today. That would have been jokes. But how do you feel that, you know, your multidisciplinary status, your use of image and different types of genres has informed your approach to conception, to pacing and planning in your music?
I think, well, I guess the main thing is that I don't think about genre at all. Like, I deliberately never think about, I'm going to write a pop song now, I'm going to write an orchestral piece, I'm doing a remix, I'm doing something for a film. I'm not someone who is able to, well, it wouldn't help me to be musically thinking about the ingredients or signposts the markers that would make up that material. So I deliberately am trying to forget about it. And sure, a lot of the stuff might have completely different performers, you know, an orchestra versus my band, which is, you know, electronics plus a few instruments. But the actual musical ingredients, the building blocks of the, you know, kind of actual musical content is really similar across everything I do. So yeah, I get people talking all the time about you writing lots of different genres, and I don't think that's true. I think actually I write music that gets performed in lots of different contexts, but the actual genre, I'm not like flipping about, you know, trying to write in a different style, because I just would do a terrible job of that. I'm mostly basically looking quite internally and trying to make the music work for whatever forces it is, but using a lot of the same, mostly context-based planning stuff that I do with everything, which is all about this sort of plotting and pacing of material, which is something that matters for me, no matter what kind of music I'm writing. So yeah, it's multidisciplinary stuff is fine. I've done lots of stuff with, you know, visual artists and dance and other art forms, but I'm not a very good collaborator, which I've sort of realised relatively recently because I'm too much of a control freak. Musical collaborator, that is, when I've been asked to, like, you know, someone else would bring this and you write this, and I don't like being like some freaky puppet master. But yeah, basically, don't think about genre is how I get around that. Just think about how you want to make this piece of music work and how you want to plan it to make it effective before. It doesn't matter what the actual, I mean, it might matter practically, like I would be asked to do some pieces where something practical has completely determined music, like I did an all body percussion piece, or a piece for some shopping centre lifts in Manchester. You know, so there, obviously, the environment and the context of the instrumentation does dictate stuff, but by and large, I try and forget about that stuff as much as possible and just make something work on a nuts and bolts compositional level, and then translate it to the right instruments.
I think it's a really interesting thing to think of, obviously, trying to go beyond the concept of genre, especially in a time where we've got, you know, everything available at our fingertips, when there's the concept of the micro genre and the fragmentation of everything, and just to go, well, I write me, and now obviously I'm going to try and put that through the right filter, the right envelope, in order to reach, hopefully, the right audience. But you were talking obviously there about the aspects of space and place, and obviously worrying about the nuts and bolts of your compositional language and the way the piece is going to work first before applying it to certain tenets. Do you think that there's you know, a really important aspect of space and place in the structure and planning of any of your works, when you know where it's going to be performed to start with, or beforehand, or maybe specifically when you have had a commission for those spaces?
I mean, if you've got some giant, really important practical thing, like, can you write us a 12-minute piece for body percussion, then you have, you know, you can't be like, I'm not even going to think about that. I'm going to, you know, that's such a limit that you have to look at the palette of options you've got and think about how you can try and structure something to be effective with the sounds that you've got. But when I don't have a limit like that, when I just can do whatever I want, like my band stuff or, you know, some other kinds of commissions I've had, yeah, I think, you know, if there's something practical that's going to affect stuff, I would definitely factor it in. But at some point, I do think it's quite useful to try and turn off the kind of, if you're trying to, I've definitely done some pieces years and years ago where I was trying so hard to tick every box of something that people wanted the piece to be. They wanted it to be playable by kids, and they wanted it to be not notated for these bunch of older kids, but who couldn't read music. And basically, I just tried to do too much, and it just diluted the idea so much that what I ended up doing was I wasn't very musically pleased with it because it didn't feel like any sort of strength behind it. So yeah, I think it's important to, you know, take on board and figure out how you're going to address any big practical or logistical challenges. Or I did a big orchestra piece a couple of years ago which had to reflect the end of the First World War, you know, and that's not something you can just kind of brush off. You know, I had to really find a way into that piece to make that work. You know, that was pretty daunting because it's not like easy subject matter to get your head around. But yeah, I also find that if it's something's a really big high pressure or high profile or something a bit daunting, that not thinking about it, just having blinkers on and, you know, getting your head down in terms of the problems, musical problems. It doesn't help at the start of the process to be thinking, oh my God, this is going to be seen by these people, or oh my God, this is going to be whatever reviewed, or whatever stuff might be stressing you out about it, or judged in any way, even if it's just by your peers. And just to not worry about any of that stuff and get on with just the practical job of making the music work. And you know, for that reason, I spend a lot, even when I'm writing electronics, I write everything on Sibelius. Well, I do a lot of planning, drawing first, and then a lot of Sibelius and I use general MIDI, which sounds awful, but it's a kind of like litmus test of the material, because I kind of figure if I can make the ideas work using really rubbish sounds, then it's, you know, rather than going straight to like electronic software and making everything sound incredible, but not actually thinking the composition works, I want to make sure that the composition works to my terms before getting it, you know, giving it out to players or giving it out to put it onto synths or into Ableton or whatever. So yeah, I spend a lot of time just being weird on my own and making it work on my own terms before it goes out in any kind of context.
I think definitely the practice of being weird on one's own should be sacrosanct for all composers. I mean, how else do we come up with the, you know, idiosyncratic, slightly personal oddities that inform our language, certainly. But it plays in really nicely to a question I had for you regarding creative process and how I was going to ask if you thought there was an inherent difference between structuring popular music and classical or notated music. But because we've thrown out genres as trying to box your work into them, one thing I might ask is, at what point when you're playing around initially, after you've got the abstract germ of an idea and you're keying it in through a general MIDI or just trying out ideas in the noodling phase, to use a technical term, as it were, do you ever get to a point where you go, this could be notated and find its way onto a sheet music and be published, or this is actually very much a more popular or performance-based thing, which goes less by using, you know, traditional sheet music and modes of classical performance?
So the thing that I do is I notate everything. So all my albums are fully notated because that's like my background and strengths. So, you know, it's not, when I started writing electronics, I was going straight to the software, and I was, you know, at the time really into James Blake, and I was trying to write some stuff like that. And what I ended up doing sounded like crap James Blake because I didn't know what I was doing with the DAW, and it was just writing layers and layers and layers of sound and had absolutely no structure to them. And that was what made me think, okay, I'm going to go back to writing any kind of music using exactly the same process. So, you know, I do this thing where I draw these plans. I'm not sure I sent them through to you guys, but yeah, these like graphic maps, which is the first thing I do with any kind of bit of material. It's on this here whiteboard. And it's a way of like a timeline, basically, of pacing out my ideas. And that is so important to me, to get the idea of where an idea you've got is going to come in the best, most powerful context. And quite often I'm working backwards from that. So if I've got a really strong baseline idea, or a shift in feel, or a new big counter melody, or whatever it is, I will draw physically, architecturally, like sort of triangle shapes, square shapes onto this timeline to show where I think this moment will have the most impact, whether that is surprising or subverting what's come before, or whether it's some kind of payoff of something that's built really organically. But either way, you know, that kind of, we all do it all the time whenever we have conversations, we've got punchlines, and we all set that stuff up all the time so that it's like, yeah, you know, the rug pulled from under your feet, or really satisfying exactly what you hoped it would be. So I spend a lot of time just working out, sometimes just listening to stuff in real time, like silence, but trying to work out when something would need to be placed in order to be most powerful, and then, yeah, what comes before and afterwards to make that thing as strong as possible, whether it's, you know, you will have something really high and delicate, so do you want something really thick and dense to make it feel even higher and more delicate, or do you want to, you know, contextualize it in something more similar so that it feels like it's a different kind of thing of something similar, you know? So it's all about these really broad brushstroke ideas of placing simple ideas next to each other to give them the biggest impact. And that's something I do, yeah, electronics, or a performed piece, or, you know, a commissioned piece, or whatever that might be. So it's the process is basically identical. The only difference is that when I'm writing for my band stuff, I'm having to do it I start the process myself, and I think I'm going to write an album with 11 tracks, and I've got these points of the compass I want to tick. I want to have fast instrumental stuff, slow instrumental stuff. I want to have like band vocally poppy songs. I want to have some things for me to sing, and I've got a really crap voice, but I want to sing. So, you know, I have to make things work there around the limits of where my little squeaky voice can work. And so, yeah, you know, sometimes I'm the one who's controlling almost like the commissions. It's like me saying, I'm going to write a really slow, aggressive brass number, or I'm going to write a frenetic, high energy rhythmic thing. And just starting with those really simple starting points, I go to these sketches. So it's just about either that being generated from someone else or generated by me, but the actual process is the same.
It's a really interesting, and I'm sure actually speaking on behalf of many composers, a very healthy thing to be thinking a lot about potential projects from a slightly away from the through composition of being in the midst of the material, and looking at things in terms of a sort of proportional density kind of thing, and thinking, well, actually at this point I need something higher in the material, at this point we need a faster section, and I'm thinking about that just in terms of you know, proportion structure, like a pie chart, away from the actual midst of the material. And of course that's as applicable, as you say, for classical music as it is for a concept album, or if you're doing something where you know we need something slower after this, and then trying to make sure that you can make sure the material's congruent, but not.
Yeah, and it works on like a macro scale, and you know, you can make it go. It can be across the whole album. You know, when I eventually had these 11 tracks, I had 11 bits of A4 paper. You know, they're all this kind of thing. So, you know, I've got basically end up with these like 11 shapes, this kind of shenanigans. You know, so I have those for each track, and then that means I can like paste objects next to each other. So I did that same thing when I did an opera, in that I pushed, you know, I made sure that the shapes work next to each other to work on that zoomed out scale. But yeah, obviously, as you say, minute to minute or moment to moment within a track, you also want to be thinking about. Yeah, and sometimes it helps just to literally write down the identity of something that you've got. You're saying, okay, what I've already got here is brass, lead, it's slow, it's chunky, it's whatever. And then you're trying to work out, okay, do I want that to transform, or do I just want one of the elements in that to transform, or do I want to completely do something totally different to that? So I think quite often I want to try and make stuff that can be really easily characterized or summarized. That kind of transparency of identity is really important to me, because I think it means that you can follow these really simple shapes, which you know, like builds basically what I like writing most, and my pals all talk about the Meredith build, because that kind of, and every single time I kind of think of it like, I've got this amazing idea, like I've thought of it for the first time. It's always yet another build. But yeah, I love writing stuff that you can, it's the intention of the material is explicit, I think is what I'm saying. I like it where people can follow the kind of trajectory of where stuff is going in terms of its direction, and so therefore making the ingredients that you are going to transform, and what kind of yeah, what kind of directional change you're going to give to that. You have to make that clear enough that people can follow that transformation. So that's something I'm always trying to step back from to check that those intentions are clear enough.
I think making sure that the concept is strong and individual is obviously a very important point, and also making sure that you really have the primary colours of the idea from the outset, obviously in whichever way you choose to start. That is very important, and it's one thing that we can all still do, obviously, in this new virtual reality we find ourselves in, which has obviously been very unlucky and unprecedented. And with regards to professional planning in that sense, and even compositional planning, what advice would you give for composers and indeed musicians in general at the moment?
I mean, I'd be lying if saying it hasn't been really tough. For me as well, I've was meant to be touring all this year, and that's all gone, obviously. And yeah, for a really long time, I just couldn't write, and I didn't want to write, and I really felt very resistant, actually quite pissed off when people were sort of saying about, like, yeah, well, why don't you try doing a stream of this? And well, what a great opportunity to write this. And I'm thinking, well, I don't actually, that's not what I want to be doing, and not what I think I'm doing best. And I'm not excited about writing a piece for 8 flutes over Zoom or whatever it is that people wanted me to do. Like, I wanted to have that control back. And I realized, well, now I'm having to be more flexible and think of ways to do stuff that feels exciting, and find ways to write music I want to write, given that I can do what I want to do, and I'm likely to be touring for another year probably properly. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's really difficult. That was actually a lot of whinging about me and not very good in the advice. Here comes the advice. I reckon, keep going, I guess, is a hard thing. It's impossible. These sort of like weird online things feel so distant, and it's very easy to just feel like, what's the point of anything, and who cares, and to feel what's the relevance of any of it, and the effort and the impact can feel so negligible. And you come off that weird sort of tumbleweed moment after every Zoom where you're like, well, I'm just gonna have a 12th cup of tea or whatever. But I think, yeah, holding the line and like keeping going and trying to find any way to do stuff on your own terms, whether that's stuff for friends, or figuring out some way to be autonomous so that you can use bits of software and not to be too phased if you don't know how to do it, but just give it a go and try and keep going. But yeah, that's not. I don't know if sort of saying really, whether the thing is to either really embrace the limits that we have and try and find ways around that, or to stick to what you want to do and try and find if the technology can work around that, which way round it goes. I'm writing a piece for Dodgems just now, and that was it's like an installation piece that's going to happen here in Somerset House instead of ice skating. You should all come; it'll be really fun. But it's like, again, like a thing I've always liked. I love Dodgems. Who doesn't want to write music for Dodgems? But it's trying to sort of, that's not something I thought I was going to be doing, and trying to, yeah, I guess get excited about things that are born out of limits, and get on board with what can happen. And nobody's got any money at the moment either, so that your grand plans are all slightly thwarted. But maybe it's I seem to be just rambling on the theme of variations of hold the line, hang in there, etc. Sorry.
I think we've got a lot of good things to take out of that, and being flexible with regards to trying to use software and stuff. I think there are some of us instrumental composers out there that felt that was very, that we very much vilified it beforehand, or were terrified of it, and actually just learning to embrace it certainly can be no bad thing. But being resourceful and inventive with, as you say, limited resources and limited organic reception is a very, very big challenge for us all at the moment. And
maybe accepting that lo-fi is good at the moment. I think, I don't know about you guys, but I've seen too many stream. I'm finding it impossible to get excited about virtually anything that I'm watching on a laptop at the moment. And so try, in which case you might as well do stuff quite quickly and experiment with things in whatever way you can make the technology work. It doesn't matter if you're using Audacity or fiddling around with some mate's guitar pedals that you're not totally sure how to work. I think it's better to just use this as a time to experiment. And on a bigger level, I do think this is an important time for people to use this moment to reconsider maybe damaging models of stuff, you know, that were in place already, traditions that we have that can definitely be reevaluated and challenged. And it's a really, you know, that's a positive thing, is that this can be a great moment to maybe make some like good stuff come out of this whole thing, and not just feel like we're just trying to get back to what was there, but actually reassess some of the stuff that we take for, you know, we just do as part of tradition and maybe don't need to anymore.
I think removing some of the prejudice that plagued a more analog world, as it were, beforehand, in terms of performance and commissioning, and indeed reception and work, is absolutely no bad thing in a wider scenario. I mean, indeed, we're having these great online discussions, which is something that we're really lucky to have. So I'm going to move over now to asking questions from students, and we've got some here. I've first got a question from Emilio, who is saying, who asks, from the perspective of planning, is the execution of any synthesizer or the instructions of a software part of your composition process also? This is, I believe, in our chat on the side.
Let me check I understand that. Do you mean, do the limits to the synthesizer affect, or does the sound of the synth affect the composition from the beginning? Is that what we mean?
I mean, like if the actual execution of the synthesizer, like moving the wavelength or any filters, is part of the actual composition, or do you imagine the sound before being actually able to create it?
Yeah, I for a while got quite into, you know, trying to figure out, you know, trying to make little synthy things, but again, I found that it didn't help me write strong or clear music, and so I've now gone the other way, that I'm almost not even that interested. And again, I'm not especially proud of this, but it just, so I use a lot of presets and work from there. I go to my synths very, very late in the process. As I was saying, it's all back at the Sibelius stage, and then towards the end I have a clear idea in my head, and it'll be really untechnical things. I'll be thinking, I know that I want a really fizzy synth for this, or I know I need a giant 90s ravey synth for this, or I know that I want a massive brassy bass line for this, and I'll just have already in my head some ideas of some presets that I know really well, I've been working with for years, and I'll sort of tweak around those to make sure there's still enough space in the mix for the, you know, the different layering, in the same way that you make sure there's space in an orchestral piece or whatever, you know, think about it in the same way to make sure sonically you can leave space for stuff. But yeah, I'm more broad brushstrokes, general qualities of sound, rather than getting into super detail, because to be honest, every time I've done that, I can't quite often even pick up on the difference. And I find, for me, it's better just to zoom out and be thinking in more general characteristics of what I want from my synth sounds, rather than, because I've sometimes done these tweaks and I haven't been able to hear it. So I'm thinking, well, I'd be better doing something cruder and making sure it had more impact.
Thank
Slapdash, that's what we're saying here.
Very interesting, yes.
That's a good question. I think we've got another one here from Jean, who says, hi Anna. Hi Anna. How often do you go back to your initial planning when actually composing? That is, do you actually follow it when composing, or do you just keep it at the back of your mind but follow the process without it?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I have it on it's like a map for me. I mean, I'm not someone who can work through improvising or sitting noodling at a piano, wherever. I have to have this plan. So it's, as a map, it's super important. And I quite often go from the drawing stage to fleshing it out into a bit of a A3 manuscript, where it becomes then like a mood board, and I'll have the blown out version of the sketch, but I'll have like little ideas of chords or rhythms that are going to be at these certain points, like little bookmarks, and then I go to space and put that into space, loads of empty bars, and then again make these bookmarks. But yeah, I mean, most of the time I'd say I do stick to the plan, and you know, because that's what I'm trying to write to. So I guess I'm trying to audition in my head or find material that's actually going to work in those shapes, rather than the other way around. I'm not sort of, I've got an idea, where can I put it? Quite often I've got shape, what idea is going to work in that shape? But it, you know, it can go the other way. And there definitely have been things where I've thought, you know, something I've come up with is so silly, or, you know, I'm so like smugly chuffed with like some idea that I've got that, you know, it needs to be extended a bit more, or it can take more repetition, or it can maybe I suddenly realised that actually it would work and smashed up against an idea from earlier on that wasn't part of my plan. So yeah, sometimes there's little changes, but on the whole, it's much more than the back of the mind. It's like a stuck in the wall roadmap of how I'm gonna write.
Yeah, really good question, really good point for that one. If anyone else would like to ask a question, please do raise your hand, and then you can actually speak to Anna directly. So you don't hear me reading out your question like I'm doing some audiobook, but you can actually put it in your own vernaculars.
Bring on the questions.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
Yeah, Anna, I mean, from what I know of your work, I mean, you're a very hands-on composer. I mean, you're very involved with what you do. As we know, you're a performer. You make albums, and and it's an approach that I think is very admirable. That, I mean, you know, one thing I always think, composers are musicians. I always shudder when I hear sort of people talk about composers and musicians. Again, it might be an advice thing, or about what you're doing is, how are you staying in these crazy times? How are you staying hands-on? And, you know, do you have any strategies for keeping a spontaneous approach? And do you have any advice for other people who are perhaps performer composers as well?
Yeah, I mean, that performing is always, it's relatively, you know, that wasn't something I went into studying thinking I was going to do, but it was that desire to get stuck in, and, you know, quite often that impotent feeling of being at a performance of a piece that was only going to be played once and not recorded and have no record of it. And it was that balance of input in to input out that made me think about starting to write stuff for my band, stuff for electronics, pieces that get repeated and you tour them, and, you know, albums that are designed for repeat listening. And so that kind of sort of shifted me a bit. Yeah, I mean, being hands-on is difficult right now. I mean, I'm really lucky. I've worked with my band for many years now, and we have had to do some rehearsing for bits and pieces of stuff. That's been really nice to have. I mean, I can't tell you how nice it was to just get into a rehearsal room and play a bit. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, I've definitely lots of the hands-on stuff I might normally be doing isn't happening, and a lot of things are being reduced to online meetings and planning, and yeah, and as someone who wants to write pieces that are normally quite, well, I guess clear, or at least I like to be quite involved in if there's anything practical happening, especially the sort of installation-y type thing. It's a bit tricky to sort of feel like you're maybe reduced to a digital ideas board rather than being able to explain stuff in person, or look around our room and think what's going to work as a piece for this room. But, you know, I'm trying to do what I can. I'm sort of pitching stuff to people and saying, you know, I've got a few ideas for things that I think could work you know, as pieces of music, and I'm sort of writing to a few people and suggesting them. You know, some people are going for it, and other people are understandably saying we're just in panic mode and not really up for commissioning stuff right now. But yeah, I'm sort of doing a mix of stuff that I'm being asked to do, but not enough, making sure I'm balancing that with things that I really want to do, whether that's paid or not. I think it's really important for kind of sanity to be finding things that you feel a little bit excited about right now, and not just feel like you're only responding to other people's ideas of what you should be doing.
Yeah, I mean, at this time, I mean, do you find you might want to, because one thinks, oh, orchestras, my goodness, when's an orchestra ever going to get back together again, for example? Do you find yourself perhaps thinking about wanting to rearrange some things and thinking, well, maybe it might be in the near future more practical, say, if 10 players get together instead of 50 players getting together? And I mean, are you looking at some of your works and thinking, well, maybe there's a different life for them now?
Yeah, that would be a really clever idea. I haven't done that because I'm lazy, but that would be a really, you know, I think a smart idea to think of other ways for people. I mean, I do have quite a lot of people wanting to particular tracks of mine. People want to play in ensembles that aren't either the Notus Sibelius is such a mess that I couldn't give it to anyone to do. We've done quite a lot of band plus orchestra. So before we toured Varmint's, the old album, with our band, and then worked with mostly kind of youth or college orchestras. If you guys want to do it, get involved, but alongside the band, and that was really fun and cool to do. But yeah, I mean, really, maybe realistically, trying to find different ways. Reorchestrating stuff would be an excellent use of time, But I think it's so hard to, it's like revising, you know, your good intentions to go back and change stuff, and then I just don't want to do it. I just keep wanting to move forward. Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about, you know, the guys in my band who are all composers and performers themselves. They've in the past done arrangements for me of my stuff. So the people I trust to maybe do that, because there's some pieces that would work well for smaller forces or like brass band as opposed to orchestra. So they can take the orchestral arrangement and redo it. But yeah, it's a good idea.
And I think next we've got a question from Devon.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for the talk today. That was really interesting. I guess my question kind of piggybacks off of Adam's, and I was going to talk about and ask you how during these kind of periods of low creativity and stuff, you keep the fire going, I guess.
I mean, for me, a lot of being able to feel, writing is about feeling personally confident, and without getting a bit kind of queer-eye about the whole thing, I do think it's really important to be feeling, you know, composing me is basically like a kind of badass version of normal me. Like I managed to take, I'm decisive and sort of managed to be quite strong and no bullshit in terms of how I approach the kind of composing. And in order to kind of get into that state, like I was saying earlier about the blinkers and not getting too fretty about, you know, who's going to like it. And don't get me wrong, I still personally worry about all kinds of that stuff, but actually in the moment composing me doesn't do it. And I don't know how, but it's a real blessing to be able to just in that moment channel the important stuff. But in order to be feeling that kind of confident and decisive and up for it, I need to be kind of in quite a good place mentally, and that involves, you know, all the usual stuff that you might imagine, you know, to not go totally bonkers, which is, you know, well, also a deadline always helps anything. You know, definitely the old decisiveness dramatically increases with the imminent deadline. But yeah, you know, I need to be seeing friends. I need to be reading books. I need to be not just only eating absolute crap. I need to be doing bits of exercise. You know, it's like obvious stuff, but if I kind of feel like I'm not total mess personally, it definitely affects how I go in, how the kind of approach I go into the kind of confidence I go into that starting composing sort of attitude. So flaky as it might sound, I really think that kind of stuff's important.
Great, thank you so much.
I think the aspects of lifestyle, you can't overstate that, can you? Making sure you get up and have a good routine. It's very important.
I mean, I remember we had a talk with Mark Simpson actually back in the spring in the complete lockdown, and he kept saying, I mean, he'd obviously maybe had a bit of a rough time, as we all have. He said, be kind to yourself. He said that's such an important thing, is don't sort of expect too much of yourself, because it's very, very hard for anybody to be doing that at the moment. And so, you know, give yourself a break and do things that are purely enjoyable and irrelevant if necessary. If it, you know, to take one's mind off things, then that's the best way to be refreshed.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, to not compare to how, you know, some people have found this whole time really inspiring and have done, you know, I know people have been writing a piece a day or got, you know, used it to learn new software or retrain or learn a new language and stuff. And for many months, I was literally just watching Selling Sunset and like weeping and eating biscuits. You know, I think it's like fine to not be doing anything productive. And, you know, as you say, it's been such a crazy time. And I think we can't even begin to understand the impact of what this time is going to be. You know, while we're in the middle of it, yeah, you do. You just need to give yourself a bit of a break and find ways to feel okay. And, you know, whether that is some writing, great. But yeah, definitely not beating yourself up if you're finding it difficult. And, you know, I think the not comparing is important, because as we all know, online social stuff, it can look like everyone else is completely sorted, and finding this whole time easy and effortless. And, you know, for a lot of us that you know, that really probably hasn't been the case for those people as well.
Very sage words there. Next up, we've got a question from Mr. Twy Roberts.
Yeah, Hi Anna, and hi Henry. Thanks so much for doing this. This is a treat to have a window into your process. I was just wondering, it's kind of an obvious question, I guess, but what is there any art or music that's inspiring or exciting you at the moment? And also, do you find when you're in the midst of writing, do you try and avoid other work, or do you lean into it? I'm wondering if there's or neither.
Yeah, so another embarrassing truth. I feel like I'm spilling a lot of my bad advice here, but yeah, I realized about sort of 4 or 5 years ago when people kept asking me for playlists of stuff, and they would listen to the things, and quite often, especially from the sort of pop press, I'm viewed as incredibly experimental and oh my god, I bet you listen to some amazing stuff. And I was literally looking, and it's all just like Pet Shop Boys, just literally streams and streams of Pet Shop Boys. And so, I basically never, and this is not something I would advise, never listen to music. And it's not like I live in like a weird vacuum where like I go to Sainsbury's and run out screaming because I can't stand that there's like Michael Bublé playing or whatever. But I just don't, it's not a helpful for me marker. If I hear someone else has written an amazing opening to a track, and I try and think of that as some kind of reference point, I'm only at best going to do a watered down version of their thing. So I'm trying to remove all these musical reference points as much as possible. So yeah, I listen to my friends' stuff and, bits and pieces that I loved when I was younger, and, things that I played in orchestras and things like that. But I don't ever go out looking really for music, because it just, as I say, kind of messes with my confidence sometimes, or just doesn't help me musically. But I say that with the caveat that when I was studying, I think it's really important. And so, definitely ignore everything I'm saying. But personally, for me, it has actually kind of helped me almost to just recognize that I listen to music now for other reasons. I listen to it because it's got like mega nostalgic value, or it's like some filthy erasure from back in the 90s or whatever, and I like it for those reasons rather than because I'm trying to understand the music. I'd like it to relax. Or so I basically listen to a load of audiobooks and sometimes some podcasts. But yeah, I'm a total Philistine basically, and who I'm most of the stuff I'm watching and listening, I'm doing to give my brain a bit. I mean, this is what I tell myself. It's actually maybe I'm just having zero kind of quality content at all. But yeah, most of the time I'm just thinking of stuff that's going to help balance me to get in that kind of confident headspace, rather than find directly inspiring. But there's been there's Owen Pallett's album that's come out. That's great. I haven't listened to it, but it's a new James Blake EP. I'm sure that's really good. There's bits and pieces of stuff that I think Bjork might be putting something out quite soon. There's people I definitely keep an eye out for what they're doing, and we'll always listen to their stuff at some point, but not much that I seek out. Again, bad advice.
Thanks. I'll throw out all my CDs and fill this with Pet Shop Boys as advised.
You won't regret it, honestly. Wall-to-wall bangers. Go for it.
Oh, you've just reminded me of that description of your music as majestic bangers from The Guardian. That's really good to know, though, that I don't, I shouldn't feel bad about not putting on Lackerman when having a beer at 10 in the evening, because I think there's a stigma sometimes that we should all be listening to new, seminal, or fantastic pieces and not be,
Yeah, I mean, you should listen to one of the saddest things I remember hearing was it's interesting to me when people's playlists aren't reflected in their music at all, and I'm quite find that it's an interesting juxtaposition. I'm not saying it's impossible or even weird, because I'm sure for a lot of people they listen to stuff and they want to write in a very different space, but it is an interesting question to ask yourself. If you look at your most listened to music, how does that relate to your music? And similarly, I remember asking someone at some point if they liked their own composed music, and they were like, "Oh no, God, I hate my music. It's like awful. I like listening to whatever it was, something completely different." I think they like musicals, and they love like Phantom and stuff. And I was looking at this music, and it was like so academically written, and billions of cross rhythms and loads of process. And I'm saying, so why are you doing this? And why are you writing? What you actually want to be writing is like some kind of Cats follow up. Then go for it. So I think it's challenging, checking your intentions, whilst giving space for exploration and experimenting and definitely trying stuff out. But that relationship between what you like and what you listen to is an important thing to check in with yourself, I think, every now and again.
Really interesting point about not becoming a carbon copy of listening to certain music, or the danger of listening to certain music in the middle of the creative process. I remember reading an article a while ago where Sally Beamish was working on a string quartet reed stanzas, and she said she'd been listening to Britain's Third String Quartet all the time during the breaks. I mean, interesting. I think I wouldn't be able to deal with the noise. Not that I hate Britain's late work. I just don't think that I would want that sound at the time. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people might absolutely want to start a piece by having a whole bunch of reference points, and that's totally fine. It's just working out, what works for you. And like you say, I think in the breaks, I would need to be as far away from anything similar to what I was doing as possible. But I can imagine a place where you just are in this world, and maybe it's a connection, or you see it as a partner piece, or a sort of response in some way, and it might feel like it was really important to just be sort of immersed in it like that.
I feel I should move on to our next question, because we've got a plethora of hands raised, so I don't think we'll be able to accept any more questions than the ones I've got here. But a question from Ruby and Aidan.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I wanted to ask, what was it like working with Bill Burnham, and how did that come about? And what was it like adapting your music to a feature film?
Yes, I was really lucky there that he had somehow, actually, no, I was going to flatter myself and say he'd heard of me as a huge fan. That's not true. I think what had happened was he had a very specific list of what he wanted. He wanted to work with a classically trained composer who'd moved into electronics, who was starting to work in film, and his description was, and had a warmth at the centre of their sound. And, ultimately, I think and was preferably a woman. And I think ultimately, I kind of was like, oh, well, that's just, doesn't leave that many people. But nonetheless, really amazing that he asked me. And I was really lucky with that film. This film's 8th grade, recommended for all your procrastinating needs. It's a really lovely film. And I was really lucky. It's my first full soundtrack that I'd done. And I'll say, and I was really lucky again, because he basically let me do what I wanted. He wanted the music to be really strong. He wasn't saying, can you hold back, or can you, if you hear that film, the music is so loud in the mix, and it's, it's almost like another character in itself. It's all about a teenage girl, and he, rather than kind of making it cutesy and mandolins, he wanted it to feel like her anxieties about going to the pool party, or about talking to the cool girls in school, were, as real and as diffusing a bomb or whatever it is. Those were for her the big dramas, and he wanted to heighten that by letting me write as strong or anxiety-driven music as possible. So yeah, I wrote it unbelievably quickly. He was here for a lot of it in the studio, and we just he was here with me, and he's really musical as well. So I don't really feel I had to adapt that much. And I think, to be honest, now that I'm doing some other film stuff, I think I realise how lucky I was in terms of that freedom and that space. And I've had other people saying, yeah, we like your stuff, but can you just tone it down a little bit? And I'm thinking more of a drone for 15 minutes here or whatever. And that freedom to be a big presence in the film was amazing. And
Can you talk about your upcoming film or films?
Nothing, not really. It's nothing that's super pinned down, as you can probably imagine. Loads of stuff has gone up in the air at the moment, and everything's on hold. So things that looked like they were coming have kind of gone slightly quiet, and a lot of stuff hasn't been. Off the back of 8th grade, I got asked to write about 1 million pieces about anxious teenage girls. So I think there's a certain amount of trying to work out what I think. I did a Netflix show after that, and maybe trying to think about what might be a kind of slightly different direction. You guys probably find this as well, but you do one thing, and what you want to do then next is something completely different, but what everyone else wanted to do is more of the same of that. So it's always trying to find ways to say, yes, I know you'd like me to write another body percussion piece, but I actually did that 10 years ago, so I'm going to do something totally different now or whatever. So using things to bump yourself into a new direction rather than keep looping round and round.
Cool.
Yeah, what thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And next we've got a question from Corey Smith.
Hiya.
Please.
I just wanted to say that we've been listening to your latest album and dancing in the kitchen, and
Great location. Perfect.
yeah. But I was wondering because that it kind of feels like it's so much about the rhythm and the music and the movement of it, like when we're dancing to it. Do you prefer to write things like just solely about with the music in mind and the sound worlds, or do you ever write things like about something like with a story or about a current event or something?
Yeah, I mean, not. I mean, some of the pieces that have lyrics, the sort of tracks that have lyrics in them or singing, I've had to think about a sort of story or a situation to contextualize those words. And writing lyrics has been something that's been I found pretty difficult. It's not something I've done much before. Obviously, you set other people's words and yeah, but normally I don't do much that's too external looking. Like I was saying, it's this kind of internally driven stuff, but that movement stuff is very important to me. And actually, when you were talking about dancing about it, that visceral physical reaction is really important to me when I'm writing. And I'm quite often looking for, in fact, I'm doing it automatically now, like things that make me like clench my fists with excitement about how amazing I am, and I'll sort of write something and I'll sort of be like, oh my God, like really excited by some idea, and I'm out my seat and I'm jigging around my studio thinking like I'm some genius that I've cracked some idea or whatever. So yeah, I'm looking for things that make me excited and joyful and yeah, have like make me respond physically. And I sort of know that that's again one of my kind of tests of my ideas is if it has a sort of pushes like a physical reaction, then that's something I want to do. So yes to physical, sadly not so much on the external stuff, but who knows, I mean, maybe it'll be impossible to not reflect this year in some way in future stuff. It'll be interesting to see how that all kind of pans out.
Actually, before we go to our last student question, on the topic of fibs, I think I've actually got a question that's come in from Facebook from our own alumnus Daniel Cadane, who asks, actually, do you have a favourite track from Fibs and why?
Oh my God, I'm so honoured. Well, I mean, the cop-out answer is I have to see them all like my babies. They're all, I worked my arse off writing an album, and and some people only like some people like, oh, I only like the instrumental stuff, or other people, oh, I don't like the vocal stuff or whatever. And that's fine. For me, I want to do the full, kind of spectrum of stuff. Maybe just in terms of things that I was really pleased that I cracked in terms of I was worried or anxious about writing them. I mean, one of the tracks, Paramore, was just like fun to do. It's like long and rangy and like silly, fast. But probably musically, there's a sort of a poppier song called Inhale Exhale, which I always wanted to see how just like full on Radio 1's Big Weekend at Skegness banger I could try and do. And yeah, and try and make that work around my really squeaky thin voice, but still feel like a strong, like proper pop song, in my own sense of that. So yeah, probably that, even though I don't think anybody would listen to it and think, why would you? But yeah, writing a song is hard. It's got to stand up to a lot of repetition in certain ways, and I still like listening to that song, which after about 9 squillion repetitions, it's probably all I can ask for, really.
I think it's always really great to hear a composer talk about their favourite child or potentially favourite child, which will probably usually be an unusual choice and not the commercial favourite or whatever. But I thought that was, I know what you mean about the Radio 1 sound, certainly. We've got one last question here from Ethan Mitchell.
Hi, Anna. I'm not familiar with your music, but I think after this, I'm totally going to check out your music. It sounds great. But yeah, my question is, essentially, I am very interested in this sort of very broad kind of, pop classical crossover kind of thing. Very broadly, like, I really like Bjork's music and such. But I think what I wanted to ask is if, you know, I wanted to produce that kind of music in the future alongside, you know, concert works and kind of balancing that kind of things, how would I market myself, or at least how have you tried to manage that? Have you kind of treated things separately or kind of just bunged it all together? I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I deliberately haven't, you know, hence why it's my name doing this pop stuff and not band name. And there's nothing wrong with making it separate. You know, lots of people I know work really well because they have different identities or names for the different projects. But for me, like, there's only kind of one thing I can do in terms of how I can write. And so, yeah, I've deliberately, as I was saying earlier, like, I don't see any real ingredient difference in the actual music that I write. So yeah, in terms of marketing, I totally appreciate that music's not going to be for everybody, but I feel lucky in that I think I know that I can write orchestral music, and I know that I can write film music, but I don't really worry too much about how I'm marketed or viewed, I guess, too much. You know, people are either going to want it or not want it or not get it for whatever reason. So yeah, for me, the answer would be to not try and separate yourself into two individuals. Oh my God, something like a fire alarm. Run, guys! Is everyone okay? Ruby and Aidan are out here. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, don't separate it out. But for other people, I'd say, yeah, it absolutely can work to have little side projects, and especially if you're just experimenting with different ideas. Sure, make a band name and set it up and give it particular sounds and say it's only going to do half-speed punk covers, or you're only going to use old shipping forecasts from the 1940s and write along to that string quartet or whatever. You know, just like find some little identity or thing that a particular project's going to do. But I think mercifully right now, as a landscape, it doesn't matter too much. I don't really think people care too much anymore about whether it's what genre, you know, if it's pop or, you know, I think there's so many people writing, you know, interesting pop people writing with acoustic instruments and vice versa. So I think hopefully you don't need to separate things out in terms of genre if you don't want to.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
I think it's very encouraging for a lot of us up and coming composers and creators to, you know, hear that we mustn't or should try and avoid stigmatizing our work or boxing it up into a certain genre when going forward, especially because obviously in our age, so many of us have had different influences. So we're coming to the end of our time now anyway, and thank you so much for doing this, Anna. But I just wanted to ask if you had any final words of wisdom or any lingering thoughts you want to leave us with.
I mean, normally I like to round this off with a sort of like be yourself and, you know, believe in yourself, kind of Pocahontas style empowering message. I don't know, some kind of, you know, see the earlier content vis-a-vis hanging in there, I guess. But yeah, I really appreciate how weird a time it must feel for everybody, and you know, hang in there. Brackets, we're going to come do a gig in a year. Come to that in Manchester. That's something to look forward to. You know, sure, it's just a year, but we can all. I mean, I'm putting that in my diary. I mean, that's a mental thing. It's the scale of this whole thing, right? There's nothing to like pen. There's no bookmarks. You can't say, oh, well, I know this will be better by here, or I know I'll be definitely able to, you know, we're booking band gigs now for over a year's time, but who knows? But I think it's, you know, giving yourself something to try and look forward to. So, yeah, hang in there. Don't go mental.
Hanging in there before hanging out together, maybe next year or whenever.
Nice. Yeah, let's do that.
Wise words, certainly. So thank you so much for this, Anna. I'm sure like everyone has taken a lot of different things from this because we've discussed a lot of stuff. And thank you to all the students we've had joining us on Zoom today. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for listening. Listening to me ramble on and probably step on Anna's word too much. Thank you for everyone that's joined us on Facebook and the live stream as well. This is obviously the first in our series of insights, so do stay tuned for future instalments. And I hope you can join us again very soon. Thanks again, Anna, and we'll look out for more stuff.